Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, some of you may have noticed I've been a little bit absent of late, especially from school, but this is the reason why. I wanted to introduce you to little Eloise. This is Eloise Grace Bartlett. She was born on the 13th of October, and so that's why I've been absent for a while. I know you guys are enjoying Book Week, and Book Week's one of my favourite weeks, and since we started knowing that Elly was around and was on her way, I've been digging into some of the old stories that I really enjoy. And given that Medieval Matt is my name online and in my other work, I've been digging into some of the old medieval stories. And in fact, one of my favourite ones is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is one of the stories from the Arthurian legends. This is my favourite rendition. I'll put it down in the notes below the video as to which edition it is. This is my favourite translation, it's my favourite edition, and the pictures are quite nice. Since I'm putting this online, I don't want to violate any copyright stuff, so all I'm going to do is read to you the description of the Green Knight. Gawain is one of my favourite knights from the medieval Arthurian legends, and the Green Knight is one of my favourite characters, one of my favourite stories, because it teaches us a lot about knightly virtues, about being a virtuous human, about being a virtuous man, but also about just general life lessons, which is really interesting. And the descriptions in these books of the different characters are really beautiful. So I'm going to do my best. Hopefully it comes out all right. I'm a little bit tired. This one's been keeping us awake. She's lots of fun though. And I'll bring her to meet you guys as soon as I can. So let's give it a go. So what's happened is King Arthur's hosting a feast over Christmas, and all of his knights, the ladies, all of the families, everyone's in attendance. Lots of the kings from various kingdoms that all owe fealty to King Arthur, they're all there. His wife Guinevere is there. Everyone's having a good time. And all of a sudden, they start to hear a weird noise coming from somebody entering the room. And it's this weird person that comes in, someone they've never seen before. This happens a lot in Arthurian legends and most British, French, and medieval legends from those different areas. So let's just hear this description of the Green Knight. It's probably one of my favourite characters. Alright, now, on the subject of supper, I'll say no more, as it's obvious to everyone that no one went without. Because another sound, a new sound, suddenly drew near, which might signal the king to sample his supper, for barely had the horns finished blowing their breath, and with the starters just spooned to the seated guests, a fearful form appeared, framed in the door, a mountain of a man, immeasurably high, a hulk of a human from head to hips, so long and thick in his loins and in his limbs, I should genuinely judge him to be half giant, or a most massive man, the mightiest of mortals, but handsome too, like any horseman worth his horse, for despite the bulk and brawn of his body, his stomach and waist were slender and sleek. Anyone that rides horses knows this is an important factor. In fact, in all features he was finely formed, it seemed. Amazement seized their minds. No soul had ever seen a knight of such a kind, entirely emerald green. And his gear and garments were green as well, a tight-fitting tunic tailored to his torso, and a cloak to cover him, the cloth fully lined with smoothly shorn fur, clearly showing, and faced with an all-white ermine, as was the hood, worn shawled on his shoulders, shucked from his head. On his lower limbs his leggings were also green, wrapped closely round his calves, and his sparkling spurs were green gold, strapped with stripy silk, and were set on his stockings, for the stranger was shoeless. That means, so stockings, they're referring to men's outfits. They were tight pants that we call hose today. So, and were set onto his stockings, for the stranger was shoeless. In all vestments he revealed himself veritably verdant, from his bell hooks and buckle to the baubles and gems arrayed so richly around his costume, and adorning the saddle stitched onto the silk. All the details of his dress are difficult to describe, embroidered as it was with butterflies and birds, green beads emblazoned on a background of gold. All the horse's tack, harness strap, hind strap, the eye of the bit, each alloy and enamel, and the stirrups he stood in was similarly tinted. And the same with the cantle and the skirts of the saddle, all glimmering and glinting with the greenest jewels. And the horse, every hair was green, from hoof to mane, a steed of pure green stock. Each snort and shudder strained the hand-stitched bridle, but his rider had him reined. The fellow in green was in a fine fettle. The hair of his head was green as his horse, fine flowing locks which framed across his back, plus a bushy green beard growing down to his breast, and his face hair, along with the hair of his head, was locked in a fine line at elbow length, so half his arms were gowned in a green growth, crimped at the collar like a king's cape. The mane of his mount was groomed to match, combed and knotted into curlicues, and tinselled with gold. That's a hard word to say. Tinselled with gold, tied and twisted green over gold, green over gold. The fetlocks were finished in the same fashion, with bright green ribbon braided with beads, as was the tail to its tippity-tip, and long tied thong lacing tight. It was strung with gold bells which resounded and shone. No walking man had witnessed such a warrior or weird warhorse, otherworldly yet flesh and bone. A look of lightning flashed from somewhere in his soul. The force of that man's fist would be a thunderbolt. Yet he wore no helmet and no hauberk either. No armoured apparel or plate was apparent. He swung no sword, no spotted no shield, but held in one hand a sprig of holly, of all the evergreens the greenest ever, and in the other hands held the mother of all axes, a cruel piece of kit, I kid you not. The head was an ell in length at least, and forged in green steel with a gilt finish. The skull-busting blade was so stropped and buffed it could shear a man's scalp and shave him to boot. The handle which fitted that fiend's great fist was inlaid with iron, end to end, with a green pigments picking out impressive designs. From stock to neck, where it stopped with a knot, a lace was looped the length of the haft, trimmed with tassels and tails of string fastened firmly in place by forest green buttons. And he kicks on, canters through that crowded hall towards the top table, not the least bit timid, cocksure of himself, sitting high in the saddle. And who, he bellows, without breaking breath, is governor of this gaggle? I'll be glad to know it's with him and him alone that I'll have my say. The green man steered his gaze deep into every eye, explored each person's face to probe for a reply. The guests looked on. They gaped and they gawked and were mute with amazement. What did it mean that human and horse could develop this hue? Should grow to be grass green or greener still, like green emerald emblazoned by bright gold? Some stood and stared and then stepped a little closer, drawn near to the knight to know his next move. They'd seen some sights, but this was something special, a miracle or magic, or so they imagined. Yet several of the lords were like statues in their seats, left speechless and rigid, not risking a response. The hall fell hushed, as if someone who were present had slipped into sleep or some trance-like state, no doubt. Not all were stunned and stilled, but dread, by duty bound to hold their tongues until their sovereign could respond. So that is a description of the Green Knight arriving in King Arthur's hall. It's about to get really interesting in the story, but if you want to know more, you're going to have to look for the stories. This interpretation or any of the others are wonderful to read. This just happens to be my favourite. Anyway, happy book week. Sorry I'm a little bit late. I got a little bit tied up with something else. And Eloise and I would like to say hello as soon as possible. I'll see everyone in a couple of weeks.